Hello and welcome. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Explore Generative AI Tools. My name is Sarah Shane, and I use she, her, and they, them pronouns, and I'm an instructional designer for academic technology support services, and I'm kicking this off here today. We also have representatives Bill and Mary from the Center for Educational Innovation, Jennifer from Academic Technology Support Services. Cody is also online with University Libraries, and Lauren and Susan are going to be helping support us here today too. So I'll get into a little bit of that, and they will introduce themselves as they do part of the presentations. So today may feel a little bit overwhelming because we are going to talk about at least 8 different generative AI tools, but know that we do not expect you to deep dive into all of the tools or the prompt engineering that we mention in the next 90 minutes. So take what you can, leave what you can't, and know that you can always ask questions later on. We do not expect you at all to log into all the tools that we are sharing. That is your choice and risk. None of these tools are officially supported by the university, but we will provide resources for each tool. Some of those include videos that you can watch, so you don't have to log in. And then, as I mentioned, Cody Hennessy from the library, Susan Tade, and Lauren Marsh from ATSS are our main chat support, so feel free to use the chat today. We do have links to our slides that I'm putting in the chat right now. So you have access to those. We have captions enabled as we're doing a bit of an access check here. Know that the captions are not perfect in what we have in Zoom. We love to see your faces as it helps us feel interactive. And I know people have their cameras on already. We were showing coffee mugs a minute ago as people were coming in. And we really don't mind if you're not camera ready. That being said, we know that not everybody's going to have their bow ties on today. But that being said, feel free to turn, we know that you may have to turn off your video for whatever reason. If you are going to be in motion or in movement, please do turn it off because that can be distracting to other people. But we do invite you to take care of yourself during today's session and take breaks as needed. We will be switching who is sharing slides between each presenter. So that could be a good time to stand up, take a stretch break or whatever. Any feedback or issues that you have, please email us at teachingsupport@UMN or mention it in our survey that we're going to share at the end. We will have a survey at the end to get your feedback on this session. As you may already know, if you were here when we started, we are recording the session, but for our presentation purposes, are sharing resources in the slides. So there are all the resources in the slides. For those that are watching this later, you will have links to the things that we will most likely be putting out later. You'll get a follow-up email, whether you're watching this live or watching this recorded, that has content of today's session. We're using chat, as I mentioned earlier, so I encourage you to ask your questions and answer each other's questions. But know that if you get overwhelmed by the chat, we will be bringing forward questions later in the session. And as I mentioned, that we will be sharing resources later, so you don't have to follow everything that is going on in the chat. Last time, we had a very active chat. So I am going to attempt to do something now, but I'm realizing my captions are over what I'm going to attempt to do. I'm going to put something in the chat, and I'm going to have you try to use your reactions button. You have a little reactions button that can give you a green check mark or a red X. So if you've knowingly explored 3 or more generative AI tools before today, will you please use the reactions button and give us a green check if you've explored several, let's just say several, 3 or more generative AI tools, and give us a red X if you have not. And this is the reactions button is what I'm looking for here. So it should show up in your little picture is what I'll be looking for. While you're doing that, I am going to adjust some things on my end so I can see this a little more. All right, we have about 39 people saying that yes, they have explored, 75 people saying they have not. And then we have some other checks and X's that I'm curious where those, I think those may have come from the emojis as opposed to the reactions. They're still showing up. This is great. Thank you for that information. I'm going to clear all that feedback and we are going to move on. Okay, we're ready to dive in here. For the last year plus some now, we have been hearing more and more about generative AI tools like ChatGPT, Bard. Generative AI tools have a remarkable capacity to generate text, slides, realistic images, music, course content, research questions, and generative AI has the potential to be a positive transformative force in our society. In higher education, its potential to impact teaching and learning methodologies is huge and cannot be ignored, and that is part of why we're here today. However, to be clear, today we are not addressing concerns around students' misuse of generative AI or academic integrity issues. Instead, we are trying to shift the conversation and focusing on what generative AI can do for us as instructors or people out in the world and our teaching. We are improving our AI literacy. Today, we are exploring questions such as what role does generative AI have in personalized learning and time-saving approaches, instructional design and course assistance, academic writing and research, having fun with images and music and more. With the ever-changing nature of generative AI, it is vital that the teaching and learning community strive to keep up to date on these emerging technologies. We know this is a near impossible task, but at least we're starting here today. We are building our, and hopefully in turn, our students' AI literacy. As we improve our AI literacy, it's important for us to know some background knowledge and continue to have a critical lens with the tools that are being developed and how they are being talked about, used, and improved or not improved. So some insights on or things to think about as we have our sort of AI critical lens on things is one thing that we need to do in developing our literacy is understand the basic concept and technologies used by AI. We need to critically evaluate AI platforms, systems, and their outputs for accuracy and biases. Use AI to responsibly discover, solve problems, and co-create. We need to communicate effectively about AI with others, that includes our students, and consider the ethical implications of AI on work, creativity, culture, politics, health, and the economy. I have some links in the notes here for Rutgers Center for Cultural Analysis. They have a critical AI working group and a critical AI interdisciplinary journal. And I just want to quote something that's on their about page, is that generative AI is touted as the fourth industrial revolution. AI is nonetheless poorly understood and subject to hype, misinformation, and anxiety. Though there is increasing talk about making AI ethical, democratic, and human-centered, scholars in the humanities are seldom shape these discussions. Though today we are simply exploring tools here today, I'd like to think that we're bringing people together from multiple disciplines to explore and envision new ways of thinking and working and teaching and learning. So our agenda for the day, I wanted to call this speed dating with generative AI, but we're not really setting you up for speed, interacting with each of them. But today what we're doing is we have 15 minutes with writing, 15 minutes about course assistance, 15 minutes with images and presentations, and 15 minutes with research. And then we have time at the end for our question and answers. I do want to note that there are bonus slides at the end of the slides that Cody put together for specific to coding that we're not going over in today's presentation, but they are in the slides for you. So I am going to stop sharing now and hand the presentation over to Bill.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Sarah. My name is Bill Rosaitis. I'm with the Center for Educational Innovation, and I'm going to be talking about using generative AI to support writing instruction. So in the last year or so, since ChatGPT came on the scene and everybody started paying a lot of attention to it, there have been just a blizzard of examples and variety of different kinds of activities and approaches to using generative AI tools like ChatGPT for writing instruction. So I thought it might be useful to start out this discussion with sort of the framework or a kind of a grounding in some of the ways in which people are using this. Of course, these examples aren't exhaustive by any means. I mean, I think they're coming out daily. In fact, I just saw some today. People through blogs, people using different kinds of activities to support student writing instruction. So generally, though, the ones I've seem to group into these categories, using Chat GPT. And by the way, I'm using Chat GPT as sort of the as a catch-all for generative AI writing support tools, but there are many others like Bard and Claude, and they all work in a somewhat similar way. One big one that people use is use it for brainstorming. That is, it helps students generate ideas or themes to support their writing. A lot of times, beginning writers in particular, really anybody, has sort of a fear of the blank page. I know you look at that and you say, how can I start? Well, generative AI tools are one way in which you can at least output something that students can then start working with. So it can be really useful as part of the writing process in that regard. Some faculty are using it as to help students organize their ideas into some kind of a coherent shape, or to expand their ideas so it can help them find more evidence on particular topics or sharpen a thesis. Or some people even use it as a way of counterclaiming. In other words, you might ask ChatGPT to push against an idea that you've presented so that students can think, okay, what are the arguments that I need to counter here or rebut? Do I need more information in order to do that? These are the kind of sort of rhetorical moves that beginning writers in particular have a lot of difficulty with. And I think these tools can actually really help with that quite a bit. I think the last two really focus more on using ChatGPT as a way to help students understand what these generative AI tools can provide as part of the writing process. So comparative analysis, really, I think this is kind of interesting. People have students write a paper on their own on a particular topic, and then they'll have ChatGPT produce a paper using a prompt, and then they'll compare the two and see what the difference is in terms of style or tone or the kind of information or examples it provides, maybe the organization. And that's a way of, I think, cluing, at least these people are claiming, a way of cluing students into sort of the writing voice and their positionality as writers. So it can be actually quite interesting for that. And another, I think, big area is using ChatGPT in writing courses as a way of introducing students to AI literacy. In other words, helping them think about what it means to use a support like this as part of the writing process. What does plagiarism mean? What are the benefits and drawbacks of tools like this? When do they hallucinate? How much should you rely on them? Those kinds of things. I think that's really, really important. And I think it raises an issue that's important to keep in mind. In every case that I've seen, these AI tools aren't a sort of like a supplement for writing, but they're a collaborative tool. They're a support for student writing. In other words, they're like a smart friend, or maybe a not so smart friend, giving students examples or pushing them or helping them think and open up their ideas. So in a sense, they become tools for critical thinking. And I think that's in some ways the most important thing to keep in mind, right? These don't supplant the writing process, but they're a part of it. They're a collaborative tool that students can use. And that, I think, focuses students in on the purpose of writing and themselves as writers. So in that case, I think we can maybe have some hope that these actually will be very valuable in helping students focus on process and product and writing. So I decided to share with you in the last 10 minutes or so that I have a use case of how you might actually incorporate ChatGPT or tools like it into writing instruction. And I decided to focus on using ChatGPT as a peer reviewer. Um, so in general, students would input an essay into ChatGPT, and then they would use instructor provided prompts to get feedback on that particular essay that they would then do something with. Okay, so that's the general process. So in order to do this, I asked ChatGPT to produce a paper. I needed something to put in. And so I asked it to produce a paper, and I told it to pretend that I'm a college freshman and to write a 250-word paper on whether social media is good or bad for society. So that's a pretty generalized and broad and really high level topic. But I was a writing teacher years ago, and that seemed to me pretty typical of the kinds of things that freshman writers would start out with. Pretty generalized prompt like that. And then what I decided to do is to test how ChatGPT handled that. It produced an essay, and to test how it handled the C prompt, as every piece of evidence followed by analysis. Okay, so imagine I'm teaching and I ask students to put this prompt in, they input their essay, and they use this particular prompt. Well, here's part of what it output. Um, you don't have to read all of this right now. The general feeling I get from it is it's pretty thin and pretty high level. So if you look at the mental health impacts, number 2, it says a more in-depth analysis could be beneficial. Explore the psychological mechanisms behind these impacts. Well, it does key students into something, but it doesn't really give them very much to work with, right? Neither does number 3, the addictive nature. But further analysis is needed. Dive into the psychology of addiction. Okay, well, what about that? So I found that inputting a full paper, and this was only 250 words, resulted in actually really quite thin results, probably not particularly usable. So I decided to take a portion of that particular paper and put that in and to see if they were any better. So I used a paragraph that was only 2 sentences long about the addictive nature of social media. And basically, what ChatGPT had written was that social media can disrupt daily routines and impact academic performance, that privacy and data security are growing concerns, and personal information might be compromised. Okay, and so I asked them to input that, or I input that paragraph and use the same prompt as every piece of evidence followed by analysis. And this is what it came back with. Still a little high level, but actually much better. In the first bullet, you see it says, delve into the reasons behind addiction, discuss psychological mechanisms such as dopamine release associated with likes. Okay, well, there's something that students can actually get their heads around a little bit, maybe research, or provide statistics that highlight how the addictive nature of social media has consequences such as decreased sleep, productivity impacts, things like that. So much better. So at least from my experiment, I think it works better having smaller bits of text input into the chatbot. It tends to return, at least like I said, in my experience, better results. So you've had students do this at this point. Now you've got a decision point here. What are you going to have them do? There's lots of things, and these are probably guided by your by your objectives, right? What are your instructional goals here? Well, you could have students work together to generate material based on the AI recommendations. So maybe they brainstorm together about what some of the psychological mechanisms might be. Maybe then they do some research on these particular things. So the recommendations that ChatGPT provided may be a starting point for more student research, right? They can find papers or materials that they could use as evidence for their particular analysis. Or you could actually have students continue prompting. You could have them take some of the recommendations that they've gotten from ChatGPT and put them back into the chatbot to see what happens. And that's, in fact, what I did. So I had the ChatGPT, I used the prompt, give me statistics that highlight how the addictive nature of social media has real world consequences. That was one of the things it asked for, right? More statistics. And this is what it came up with. Now, I haven't tracked these down, but they seem like they're legitimate, but they very well might not be, right? I mean, there are no citations, but at least it does have sources. One of the issues, and I used this to raise this during the session. One of the issues, and I'm sure you've all heard this with ChatGPT and other things like it is that it hallucinates, right? It creates material that is not true but sounds real. It also can distort material. So I didn't track these sources down, but it very well may be that they don't exist or that what it's provided here is incorrect. So one of the things that you might have students do is actually investigate these, find these resources and look at them to say, okay, is this correct? What is in this? That's actually, I think, also a useful sort of metacognitive strategy for students to help them recognize that, you know what, these things sometimes aren't correct, right? We can't rely on them for truth telling, right? They're just predictions machines. So I think having them work with these particular material, statistical material might be interesting. The other issue with ChatGPT 2 is that it hasn't indexed the last couple years of material. So anything that it's returning is going to be a couple years out of date. Okay. The last thing I'll say about statistics, and I did the same thing with Bard, which is another chatbot, and it was fairly interesting the difference in the kinds of statistical material that it returned. Bard was more specific; it had citations, but there were very different kinds of materials. So if you're planning on having students look at material like this and investigate it, you might want to play around with different tools like ChatGPT and Bard to see which ones meet your needs better. The last thing I'll mention before I turn the mic over is a prompt generation. These tools are very dependent on the quality of the prompt that you use. If you use a poor prompt, you're going to get a poor return. If you use a more specific prompt, you're going to get better returns. And the more you prompt it, the more specific you prompt it in a sequence, the better the results tend to be. So I'm sharing this application with you, this tool. It's a ChatGPT prompt generator. The link to it is in the slides, and it's a way of creating good prompts. So you tell it what role you want to play. In this case, I'm a freshman writing a paper, and then you ask it what you want it to generate. In this case, it's giving me statistics, and you can see here the prompt that it's come up with is much more specific and is likely to generate better results. So this might actually be something that you could use with your students as well, as to get them used to doing prompt engineering, right? This could be another kind of activity or assignment. So before I turn it over, I have some reflection prompts. And this is just a few things. I think it might be interesting for people, for the rest of the colleagues here, to think about, how you might use generative AI to support student writing. And if you don't think about using generative AI to support student writing, how do you feel about it? I mean, do you think it's a positive gain? Can it be useful? Do you think it's going to impact students' ability to think critically? Um, People come down on both sides of the fence on this. So as we're actually shifting gears here, I would like to see if you have any ideas that you'd like to share, please feel free to put them in the chat. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. I got caught up in the so much going on in the chat that some of this, you're asking very good questions. Many of these we will bring forward later. I am figuring out how to set up sharing my screen to come back to this. But while I'm doing this, I'm putting in the chat, we're going to now talk about generative AI course assistance. And so what type of course assistance do you most often need or want or wish for? And I'm going to give you a minute to do that as I get my slides set up for presenting. I think I am. Lauren, can you see my generative AI course assistance? Okay, thank you. I know that much of the conversation going on is about sort of around ChatGPT, and I do start off talking a little bit about what ChatGPT can do for you in course assistance. Um, uh, and I appreciate the chats. I'm not going to be able to pay attention to all the chat stuff coming in, but let's get going. So I think one of the things that we have, so I'm still getting my stuff set up here. Okay. So give me a green check. Let's just do this. Give me a green check if you'd like to refresh your course with any of these elements of designing and developing a course. So there's the reaction button that you can do a little green check. And or a red X if you're like, no, this isn't what I want to, how I want to update my course at all. All right, I am seeing one red X and several green check marks, some thumbs up here. Great. Okay, so this is a bit of what we're going to talk about today in terms of course assistance. Generative AI, as in ChatGPT, Bard, etc., can be used to help you hone in on your outcomes, modules, activities. You can sort of use it as a personal assistant of the sort. And so when you're using generative AI for course design assistance, there are like 4 elements to a prompt that you can put in. And Bill was talking about, the prompt engineering that you're doing. And you don't necessarily need all 4 of these elements, but you can also this will help establish context in your initial prompt to set the stage for subsequent prompts in a conversation. You're essentially having a conversation with ChatGPT or Bard or generative AI. So you can substitute different terms in. So in general, you want to give it some instruction. What's the task that you're asking for? Give it some context, external information or additional context that informs the model. Input data and information that you want the model to respond to or manipulate in some way, and then the output indicator format, the style, type, tone, or format of the output. I am modeling all of this off Arturo Azuno's AI prompt guide for online course design. And so there's a link to that in these slides. And I'm not going to go through all of the details because what he puts out there is very detailed in walking you through all of this. But this is one of the examples that Arturo shows. And so you can put in something like, I'm developing an online course on whatever the topic is for whatever audience, first year university students. In general, I want students to be able to, and then in broad terms, explain what students should be able to do when they complete your course. And then explain some of your instructional goals. My instructional goals are, whatever. I want to make sure that I include topics that promote a diversity of people and perspectives represented in the curriculum. I also want to be engaging, interactive, have them read so much. And then I need you to act as my course design assistant. And then again, Arturo kind of takes you through the prompts and the steps that can be, that you can go through to continue to hone in. And so you can hone in on everything from your course title to your course outcomes, to outcomes for individual models, to learning activities and more. That guide shows a nice way to work through that all. And I'm not sure if someone's put that in the chat, but I'm gonna try to, that's not the link. But yeah, so you can work through all of that kind of on your own. Again, these links are in the slides, but there's Arturo's links. Then the next thing that we've discovered out there is that there is actually a prompt very similar to this. There is something called the prompt library for educators. And it has it does very similar things, but it asks you, what is it that you're trying to get into? And I'm also putting this in the chat now too, so that you can say, all right, I want to get my course goals more focused with Bloom's taxonomy. I need help designing my syllabus. They have different categories from administration to special needs to communication and lesson plans. And they give you example prompts for things. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time today going through the details of that, just because I'm throwing a whole bunch at you of different things that you can explore later. But the prompt library for educators is one of the things that has those prompts, helps you do that prompt engineering and focus in on what you want to focus in on. All right. So let's try the green check and the red X again for your reactions button. Give me a green check if you'd like to refresh your course with a tool that would help you create any of these materials for a course. I'm putting that in the chat again. So interactive videos, if you want more help creating quizzes, both formative and summative, if glossary or flashcards would be useful for your course, fill in the blank or drag the word type questions, or higher order thinking questions. Give me a green check if this would be useful for you. See, some people it wouldn't be as useful. So appreciate it. I'm seeing over 60 people saying that, yes, this would be useful for them, and a few people saying that it wouldn't be as useful. So thank you for that feedback. The next tool that I'm going to talk about is something that has been developed from, it takes basically generative AI information that's out there, and it helps you create something to these type of interactive videos, quizzes, glossaries, etc. But I just want to give you a warning that when you're using rapid generation of interactive learning materials, they may not always be accurate. Most tools that are built off ChatGPT or other generative AI still have those same weaknesses coming through. They have the hallucinations that Bill referred to. They're confidently wrong about some things, and the bias still comes through. So as we suggest to our students, if you're using ChatGPT to help you modify things, review, verify, and modify as you move along. All right, so the tool that I'm talking about today is this tool that's pronounced Knowledge, spelled Knowledge, Knowledge, AI. And what this does is you have to have a video. You can have text if you want, but it really works best if you have a video, so you can provide a URL. It can be audio, it can be a SCORM package if you have it, and you can upload it, and the AI generator creates interactive courseware. And so I do have a brief example here of where I have done this, and I've uploaded a couple videos, and it can create things for you. Once you've uploaded a video, it asks you to review it. And it puts out there for you concepts that it felt like came through with the video. So in this case, the video was choose accessible learning content. And so it has a definition of accessibility versus a definition of accommodation. And so these are things that you can go in there and you can edit and say, nope, that's not quite what I want the definition of accessibility to be about. Or I want to add a little bit more about, accessibility is what we're designing for everyone. And it should reduce accommodation requests, and then accommodations, are specific to individuals. I can also look through here and be like, okay, it got alt text, it got captions, color contrast, color blindness, contrast radio, but there's nothing about, setting up tables appropriately and that. So I can add more concepts to these things. And then it has done all of this automatically. You can go in and adjust it. It also can create questions for you. So I can see I have true, false questions, multiple choice questions, fill in the blank, open questions, and then we can kind of examine the higher order ones to see if it really is higher order. This is the level of higher order that you want. And it also gives a summary of sort of what it sees as the key points. And it takes all of this from your video and does this. You can then generate packages that you then share with the students. There is rumored that there is an LTI that can connect to Canvas, so you can bring this into Canvas. That has not been approved yet for the university. It hasn't even been requested yet for the university, so it's not out there yet. So just want to give you that heads up about it. But this is what Knowledge can do for you. And then the other tool that I'm going to bring forward is something called TeachMate AI, and it has all of these these are the free tools that it has of things that can do. It has many more tools. You can get a paid subscription for this, and you can have more tools, but I've circled the ones that I found the most interesting, and I also am sharing in the notes of this a link to the resources that I generated based on the prompts that I gave it. So I gave it some prompts along the lines of Strategies to improve motivation. That was the well-being support. Give me strategies to improve motivation. The activity idea generator, I asked it, okay, if I'm teaching on myocarditis, give me 10 creative ideas on how to approach learning more about the heart in this heart condition. And then the intent implementation and impact generator, I asked it, tell me more about diversity, equity, and inclusion in academic technology. What are some things that we need to be considering in academic technology around diversity, equity, and inclusion? And so it generated things for this. All of this, again, I have shared in a shared resource tool, there's a folder out there that is in the here I'm getting it now. All of these are out there that you can explore. You can see me actually live do this. This is what I meant to do, but it's what I did. And so you can explore more of those in there as well. All right, and then reflection questions that I have is, how can you envision integrating generative AI tools into your current or future course development practices? And what are some potential benefits and drawbacks of doing so? Generative AI can help us save time, but what are the pros and cons for you and your students? And will it really help save time if you always need to review, verify, and modify what you're doing? And what are the ethical considerations that should be taken into account when using generative AI for course assistance? And how might these considerations influence decision-making in an educational institution or within your department? And that is what I have to share for this. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand this off to Mary.
Okay, I'm gonna get all of my things moved over here. So give me 1 second while I do that. I could not find my mouse, which is making my life a little more difficult today. Okay. Okay. View slideshow. There we go. Okay. Share screen. I'm one of those people who talks while I do things, so that's what we get. Okay, so I get to talk today about using, okay, where'd everybody go now? Sorry. Using AI for images. Okay, my computer, everything's going a little wonky here, but okay, we'll just do it like this. So using generative AI for images and presentations. And again, I'm Mary Jetter from the Center for Educational Innovation. So I love to play with new technology and new tools. So when I was had the opportunity to choose what section of this presentation I wanted to do, I'm like, I'll play with the tools, with the images, and I've had a lot of fun with it. And there are so many possibilities that ways you can use this in your classes. So I'll talk a little bit about some things that I've done with my students, and then we'll take a few minutes and explore Adobe Firefly, which is the tool that I prefer for images. So here are some tools that you can use. So the first one is Adobe Firefly. I like it because it's an Adobe product, which means it's reliable. It is free. It does require you to log in. So there's that. It also has text to image, so you can just type in descriptions. As you can guess, my background is a AI generated image. I typed in something about owls and a snowy landscape, and that's what I got. I had a lot of fun. I will warn you that once you start playing, you'll end up spending, instead of 15 minutes like you thought, maybe 2 hours, which is what I did last night. Generative fill, so you can replace the background in an image. I took my dog and had my little chihuahua on a ski lift. I had her all sorts of places just because that was fun. Generative recolor, so it can recolor an image. Text effects, you can also create text that is based out of an image. It generally produces diverse images, and by that I mean it does not just give you white people. Some of the other image generators that I tried would largely give me just very generic white oftentimes blonde people. Adobe Firefly, I like this because without prompting, it did give me a variety of people. It gave me a variety of skin tones and all of that. So I really liked that it did that without me having to prompt it. It's probably, for me, of the ones that I found, it's the most robust, and I think it's also the easiest to use. It's an Adobe product, so the interface is very straightforward. A couple other ones that I liked were Night Cafe Studio, and then the Bing Image Creator. But again, if I had to choose one, I would choose the Adobe Firefly. Again, just it's reliable, it's Adobe. Okay, so some ways you could use this. One thing to illustrate a problem or a story. So one of the things I did this fall, I worked with 2 groups of the first year honors students down here on the Twin Cities campus, and we were doing a session about AI and how to use it, ethical uses of it. And for the fun of it, one of the things I had them do was to create a 250-word story about Halloween that had to do something with the University of Minnesota. And AI was very good. It actually included things about Goldie Gopher and the tunnel system. So that was nice. And then they had to, once they had their story, they had to create an image related to that story. And then they had to get up and do a dramatic reading. So it was really fun, but it helped them to learn how to use the image generator. And I told them they had to do at least 3 iterations just so they could keep refining their prompt. You could use it to help them create a mnemonic device or a memory hook. So how would you remember a certain word or a certain concept, a certain process? It can be used to create images and text graphics for presentations. And I will show you that in a minute, what my students did. For language practice, it can be used for vocabulary, verb tense, fluency, etc. And of course, you could also use it to create avatars. So the use cases are really limitless. It's just however you would use an image. You can find a way to use Firefly and create and make a new image. So here's my use case that I'll talk about. So I teach a course called Grad 5102, which is a course for international graduate students who are or will be TAs. So I asked them to use AI to create an image related to their field of study, their research, or a class they're TAing for. And then they had to practice explaining their image to a small group of their peers. So this was, again, to help them learn how to use the image generator, which was helpful. And they all really enjoyed it. And they're like, I'm definitely going to use this again. But then also it became a language practice exercise. And it really helped them, it really stretched them in terms of language, because some of their images, as you'll see, would be hard for a native speaker of English to explain. And they really had to draw out some vocabulary for it. So here are some examples. So one of my students was in statistics. And so he came up with this random walk in probability space. So, he had a yellow brick road going off into the sun, but you can see all the different, it would be really fun to try to describe that. Another student was from history. And so he had AI create an old building in the mountains of Kurdistan. So his area was Kurdish history. So you can see here we have a low building with a tiled roof in the mountains. And that also then allowed him to talk a little bit about what this building might have been, how it was used, and all of that. Another one, so biofilm bioreactors to extract rare earth metals from waste and solve environmental pollutions. So this is sort of a maybe fantastic view of what in the future some sort of bioreactor might look at, but it's next to a river. Another student from anthropology had transgender and cross-dressing culture in East Asia. So you see there's 2 East Asian people dressed in traditional clothes with temples behind them. But again, then that also then allowed the student to explain a little bit more of the context in their research using this image. So they had a really good time with this, but more importantly, they also learned a lot from this, and it helped build community in the classroom because they got to learn more about each other's research by having an image to focus on explaining rather than talking, which can sometimes be a little awkward. And then two more. So I had a student from the College of Design. So this student made an image of retail merchandising in a virtual reality store. And this student told me that they were actually going to use this image in a presentation for one of their classes, because that was something that they were taking a class on. So we have a person standing in a store. It's a very Jetsons looking picture with a VR headset on. And then one of my engineering students had a car undergoing different types of loads. So you can see there's something on top of the car. There's a heavy load. There's bricks or something hanging off the side of the car. But then talking about the different loads, the different forces. If you're from engineering, you'll know more about this than I do. But again, it was fun, but they also were learning things as they were having to refine the prompts and thinking of words that would work to get the image that they wanted. So this is just one example of a use case that I had for my students. So we have, let's see, we have 6 minutes left. So what we'll do is now is we're just gonna go to Adobe Firefly, and we'll just create something together now. So what happens is, so I'll just talk through it first, and then we'll do a little show and tell. We'll go to Adobe Firefly. There's a prompt that says, what will you dream up today? And then after you get your first image, you can modify it by adding more words to the description, and then experimenting with some of the things on the panel to the side. And those things include things like the style. So that's the reference image you choose from. I'll show you all of those in a second. Intensity, kind of how busy the image is. If you want an image for a zoom background, you want lower intensity. Different types of effects, color, tone, composition, and if there's anything you'd like to exclude. So in my snowy winter scene, if I wanted to, I could have excluded reindeer, for example. But let's go to Firefly. Okay, so Sarah, do you want to give me something to type in here? I should have prompted told you earlier.
No, I got it ready. I didn't
Oh,
know
you
you
do?
were going to do this, but it is the Create a Mascot that combines all the system campus mascots. I want to see what Firefly does. I just put it in the chat because there's
Okay, create a mascot that combines a gopher,
a bulldog,
bulldog, a raptor,
mm-hmm,
an
eagle,
eagle,
and a cougar.
and a cougar. Okay, there we go. Let's see what we got here. It's thinking. You all can see it, right? Okay, good. It's thinking. Okay, here we go. Okay, let me, okay, what do you think of these? Okay, that's create is. Okay, so this is giving us for the different animals. So we kind of, this one's probably the most similar, right? Okay, let's get rid of create a mascot because that's giving us words and we don't want the words. So create an animal that combines a gopher. Okay, so over here you can see this is where we can make some of the changes. So we want art. Do we want a photo? Do we want it realistic, or do we want art? Somebody, what do you think, Sarah?
Oh, I say somebody else chime in here.
Okay.
Realistic. Somebody said realistic, Tara.
Realistic.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so photo is going to make it more realistic. So the style, that's the style match. So this, do we want it to look, if we're making it look like a photo, these won't apply so much, but this is all the different style references we could choose from.
Susan said less angry.
Can they be less mean and angry?
A happy animal. Okay, well, let's just try that for now. Okay. Let's see what happens. The magic. Okay, well, that doesn't really have them all. Combines. Okay, that's still not giving us what we want. Features of. Okay, so let's try again. That combines features of.
Somebody said ask for a hybrid.
Ah. Okay. Create
Thank you,
a
George, for that.
hybrid. Okay, I like that. Let's see what's happening. Okay, sorry. Turn my phone off here.
It's still giving you separate ones.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on here. Well, this one is everything combined. Okay, so what we can do with this, I learned this today, is you can choose under the edit tab here, we can choose show similar, and it will make images similar to that one. So, because that one does seem to have. Okay, I'm not seeing any eagle coming out here, but we tried. So yeah, so that's just an example of what you can do. You can also create text effects. So if you wanted to create words, like dripping with gold, if you want to create titles for presentations, fun things like that. Yeah, so here we have Christmas, peacock feathers, snow. So that is all of that. So going back to the slides, because we have 50 seconds left. My question for you all is, how might you and your students use AI image creation in your classes? So if you can think of some ideas and pop them in the chat to share, that would be great. And I know I will be really interested to see what you all are thinking of, so I can get some ideas from you as well. Thanks. Over to who is next?
That'd be me. Thank you, Mary.
Okay.
Good morning. I guess it's still morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer England. I use she and her pronouns. I'm in academic technology support services with Sarah and Lauren and Susan as an instructional designer. And in addition to my full-time staff role, I'm also a PhD candidate in CHD. So developing my research skills has been a significant part of my personal and professional life for the past several years. And I use that lens as I was evaluating different AI tools for research. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen and make sure I have everything set up properly. So if folks do want to take a quick break, that would be a great time to do that. Just move some things around. Mary, I also like to talk loud when I do all of this too, so I definitely identify with that as well. Right, so my framing question as I started exploring and using different tools was, how do generative AI tools assist with the research process? For the purpose of this presentation, I included a simplified version of the research process on the slide, starting with the planning and conceptualization stage on the right, or on the left, excuse me, and then moving all the way over to the writing of the research findings on the right. I used this framework to help plot out how each of the AI tools could be useful. And starting with the planning stage, I looked at a tool called Research Rabbit. This is a citation-based literature mapping tool. There is an account creation required to use it, and as of this week, it's still free to use. And I'm going to be switching back and forth between my slides and the tools here. So I'm going to go over to Research Rabbit so we can get a sense of what this looks like. And Research Rabbit, you start up by using it by adding papers using this green button on the bottom. And I've already done that. I added some papers that I already am using from my research, so I know that they're actual sources, not hallucination citations generated by some of the large language models. And again, I mentioned this is a mapping tool. So Research Rabbit seeks to make connections between authors, between papers, basically between the literature. So it helps to kind of do that, some of that mapping and networking process for you. And there's a lot going on in the screen. I'm not able really to do much in terms of shifting windows around, so I'll try to make allowances as best I can here. I can zoom in a little bit, and you can see that it has some of these connections already made. So it's showing who is referencing who is citing who. You can also elect to put this on a timeline, and so it'll just show the publication order of the different papers that you've uploaded. Again, the papers that I've uploaded over on the left here. And I'm going to scroll a little bit over to the right, and it will show similar work. And this is where it can get a little bit helpful, but also overwhelming, and that it'll generate a lot more citations for you to explore. And I'm just going to scroll through this a little bit here, so you can start to get a sense of what is coming up here. The authors are listed on the top, the publication dates, the article name, and then the source. These are all journals. It'll also show earlier work. So again, I have a number of papers selected. I think there's 12 or 13, and it will show me papers that were published earlier. Again, I'm using a lot of papers, so earlier work could have a wide range here. And then you could also do some exploring and then see who else you may want to look into, whose work you may want to explore further in terms of the authors that I used, or in the previous papers that I uploaded, or some related authors. And some of the names here are authors that I have already uploaded in my papers, and some are new. And so the goal of Research Rabbit was to speed up that citation searching process. And it's what they say, it's designed to support your research without constantly switching between different databases and different searching modes, which can sometimes lead into that rabbit hole, hence the Research Rabbit name. I'm going to switch back over to my slides here and talk a little bit about Research Rabbit might be useful for students who are brand new to a topic, scholars who are exploring a new area of their field, or those who are returning to a previously studied area and want to brush up on current research. And it may not be as useful for students and scholars with an established literature base. And I provided some guides in case you're interested in looking into Research Rabbit for your own. And I also provided a link to the screen that we were just looking at. And I believe you may need to create an account to see that link as well. So now that you have a number of papers, a number of references to go through generated from Research Rabbit, they need to be read and summarized. And this is where a tool called Chat PDF comes in handy. And this is also free to use. There's a paid upgrade option. I like to create accounts because I can save my chat history and look back on previous work that I've already done. And I'm going to switch over to Chat PDF here. And this is, look like I've already uploaded some papers here as well. There is an option to create folders, which is what this kind of toggle looking caret button is. And the advantage of creating folders is that you can chat, as it says, with this folder, meaning all of the PDFs that I have included in this folder. In this case, there are 2. And I haven't played around very much with this feature yet. It's something that's fairly new. But I'll give you an example of what this looks like. And I'm going to highlight a couple of the features. So I uploaded a paper that is a prompt pattern catalog to enhance prompt engineering with ChatGPT. And when I upload it, there'll be this short summary information that's provided, and then some sample questions. So again, thinking about, who might this kind of a tool be useful for, I could see for students who are just getting used to trying to navigate academic literature and trying to get a sense of how they could interact with it. Those might be some helpful questions. And so I had clicked on some of the questions, prompts that they provided here, just to experiment and see what happened. And then they'll also give page numbers as needed. And I just continued on and asked all sorts of questions of this paper. One of the new things that I thought was really helpful with Chat PDF is it didn't used to be able to do much with tables or graphs or images, but they have recently made some updates, and there is this button on the top portion of the screen, and when I mouse over it, it says drag over a math equation or a graph to have it explained for you. And so I did that over on the right hand side here, and it gave me a description, the image you provided, and then it describes the image, and it attempts to also provide some explanation around that. One of the other helpful pieces of this tool in particular is if I highlight some text, then I can have it explained to me or summarized. And I'm going to try and get this into the whole paragraph here. And so the blue text is basically what I had summarized, asked it to summarize from the article. So that's the direct text from the article. And then underneath here, what highlighted in gray is Chat PDF's summary attempt. I'm going to go back over to the slides here. Again, I found this tool to be useful for students who are new to academic research and writing. It also has a translation capability. So if you find sources that are written in other languages, that might be a good starting point for starting to get a sense of, is this article something that I may want to use in my research, and have it translated by a person. It won't be as useful for large files over 30 megabytes. So if you're trying to upload an entire book in PDF format, you might run into some issues there. And again, I gave some guides for Chat PDF and example of what that Chat PDF output looks like as well. And again, you may need to create an account in order to view what that output looks like. So the last tool that I am going to take a look at, and I see I have 3 minutes left, is a tool called Elicit. And this one can be helpful. If you think about that continuum that I showed earlier, focusing on the research question, research design stage. I will flip over to Elicit here. And when you first, after you create an account, this one is also free to use, but you will have some, I believe there are token limits, and that's, or credits, excuse me, it uses credits. And so it will show you, if you're asking a research question, it will use between 100 to 120 credits approximately. So there's 3 options for that Elicit presents. You can find papers by asking a research question. I have already uploaded a few papers, so I could again interact with them, similar to what Chat PDF offers. And then I could provide a list of concepts. And I'll go over to some of the ways that I've interacted with Elicit and show you what that looks like. So I used it to enter some research questions, enter a research question in this case, and it summarized 4 papers for me. So it provided a paragraph length summary of 4 different research papers. And as I scroll down a little bit more, it will go into those papers in more detail. It'll provide an abstract summary. There's options over on the right-hand side if I wanted to add findings, limitations, funding sources, lots of other options I see for columns that could be added. And so this will also provide quite a few more papers that are related to the question that I put in. So again, a little bit similar to Research Rabbit in that it is trying to provide you with additional papers. I thought I also did some experimenting with the concepts, and let me just see, I believe that is this one, the list of concepts. Yeah, so I just put in a term, open educational practices, and it brought up a number of related topics underneath that, advocating for policy, dialogue and reflection, statutory supplement production. So I see my time is running out here, so I'm going to switch back over to the slides.
Jennifer, we're right on time, so please finish your point.
Great, thank you. And similar to the other tools that I looked at, I gave some resources if folks would like to explore that further. So that concludes my portion. I'll stop sharing and turn it over to Susan.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And thank you to all of the presenters. Oh my gosh, what a great wealth of information. We're going to try and get some questions in right now. The chat has been blowing up. It's been so wonderful. So thank you all. So there's no way we're going to get to them all, but a lot of people are answering questions in the chat. So I would recommend that you save the chat from this Zoom session, because you're going to find some really interesting resources in there. We'll also send follow-up email to everyone that's attending today, and we'll include that. But one of the questions that I thought we should start with, because and again, some of these things people were conversing about in the chat, but I want to make sure everybody is part of that conversation. How do we deal with copyright considerations with ChatGPT? Is there anyone? Some of it was addressed a little bit in the chat, but I was wondering if any of our presenters would like to chime in on that.
Or Cody. Oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
I was going to say I don't have a lot to contribute other than what was listed in the chat. However, I have attended a presentation by Nancy Sims from the University of Libraries, which was very helpful in detailing it. And it may be that she will offer that presentation again in the future. And if I find any resources about that, I can certainly share them in the chat. And it was a great presentation, went into a lot of detail about copyright and because it, like Cody mentioned in the chat, it is currently in flux. There's no specific guidance around that. And she addressed all of that in great detail in her presentation.
Yeah, sorry, I just stepped away to my dog walker stop by. So, but I gathered the questions about copyright and ownership. And yeah, exactly. Like there's not a lot of clear guidance because courts haven't really made rulings on this. But there is, I'll put it in the chat in a minute. STM has some guidelines for scholarly communications. So people who are reviewers for journals, submitting stuff for journals that I think hold pretty well for student papers. And essentially, you shouldn't be submitting copyrighted work to any of these public tools at this stage. There's also confidentiality issues. I think you can just assume anything you put into ChatGPT or Bard, they can use however they want. So it might show up in an output later on. So if you don't have permission to put that in, at this stage, I would say don't do it. And that's basically what the guidelines are saying at this point. That might change in the future, but it's best to be pretty careful, I think.
I think, Cody, what you're bringing up is actually relevant to the next question that I would like to pose to everyone as well is, can AI help to create instructor feedback for students? And I feel probably, putting any kind of student information into these systems would be a definite no-no. So, I mean, how would you give them feedback unless you're putting the information in?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. This is Jennifer again. And so when I have taught courses, I like to play around with all sorts, with AI and all sorts of things. Just kind of see what comes up, see if I am missing something. And so sometimes I'll put in a prompt like act as an instructor, a college instructor, provide student feedback on a paper about blah, blah, blah. So it's really, it's coming from my perspective as the instructor versus what students are providing. So not sure if that might be a perspective that might be useful to folks, but that's what I've done in the past. I have not used it. I have not used the output. Again, it was just to experiment and to just to get a sense of what these tools can offer.
So just to clarify, Jennifer, if I'm understanding you, what you put in was actually your thoughts on something, but it wasn't the actual student information. It's kind of what you were overall thinking and having them finesse it.
Right, or sometimes I put in the rubric that I've used as well, just to see if there are any other pieces that I'm missing that I might have wanted to pull in for assessment, that could also be factored into my written feedback.
So good. Oh, go ahead.
Susan, I will say that I know that there are tools being generated out there right now that are claiming to help you sort of be a TA for you. And those tools, I think, are supposed to be a little bit more private, but none of them are, again, university approved. None of them have gotten LTI connections. I do think we've had one request to come in to start looking at something like that. So there are tools out there being generated, and we have some tools like Feedback Fruits already has a little bit of an AI in offering feedback to students, automated feedback to students, but it's much like your chat bots of the sort of help me, when you're online, whether it's you can go onto the university help and has a chat bot that can help you find some basic stuff, but if you want anything more detailed or have a complicated question, it's not going to give you the answers that you really want. And so that's sort of where those tools are. There may be more people out here that are experimenting with those tools. So I'm curious if anybody has explored that at all and would want to share their experience of using it for feedback for students.
I'm going to go on to another question. Again, our chat is still growing. I've got a lot of good information. One other question that came up is, if we're starting to use these tools, should we be disclosing to our students that we are doing so?
I mean, my thought is just like we want them to disclose to us if they're using it. Typically, I think it is a good thing to say, I tried to do this. This is what it helped me hone in on. Yep. Yes.
Anyone else have thoughts on that?
Well, this might also be a good time to remind everybody that um, students sort of crave clarity about what your AI policies are. And so you should probably put those in your syllabus and mention them to students. So just being very upfront about how you're using it, maybe for your own content creation, how you might expect students or encourage students to use it as part of course assignments, and whether or not that constitutes plagiarism, right? Or what constitutes plagiarism. Where are you on this kind of continuum between banning it altogether, banning AI use, or really, really leaning into it? I think that's an important thing to consider. So yes, I think you should be really clear and transparent and keep mentioning it to them, right?
And to Bill's point, somebody put in the chat earlier, and I just put it in again, there are syllabus statements that were put out through the provost's office on samples of kind of giving you a starting point. And so, again, providing that clarity to your students, letting them clearly know what your expectations are regarding that.
And Susan, I also want to mention, not Jennifer, to put you out there. Jennifer has written a post that's about a blog that's about to be published on. We did a focus groups for students on generative AI, and so there's a blog that's about to be published maybe later this week, or next week for sure. On that, and so I'm looking for where people could subscribe to
I
that.
can find that for you.
Susan will be able to get that for you. So you can subscribe to our Extra Points blog that comes from ATSS that will have some information about what students are craving and what they want and their feedback around generative AI.
And I'll add the subscription link in here shortly as well. So I'm going to go back to some more questions that we had, unless somebody has something else they want to chime in here. People were asking about reusing, there was something in the chat about regarding use for research. Are there University of Minnesota guidelines on how to handle potential confidential information that can be entered into the tools? Megan added a fantastic piece of information in there. So Megan Stein, thank you so much. And Claire added in on that as well. And so I want to make sure people are reading that, but does anyone want to summarize a little bit more about that issue?
I can just say that there are, like, I think a research group at Indiana recently published, there are pretty easy ways to fine tune prompts such that you can get ChatGPT to spit out confidential information that it has. It's not supposed to do that, of course, but anything that you're submitting that's confidential could easily come out the other end as an output. So I would say you just definitely want to avoid that.
Any other thoughts? I'm going to go back to our question sheet here. Sorry, we do have a few more times. So if you have more questions, please put them in the chat. And I would certainly love to have people just verbally voice answers if they can at this point. I'm going to go back into our questions area. One question that came up during the session was, how will professors be able to differentiate between students' authentic paper written by them versus a paper created by AI? I think that's a very tough question, and I would love to hear anybody's thoughts on that. Oh, and somebody just chimed that in, best ways to detect student use of AI, which a little bit out of scope for what we were talking about today, but if anybody has any thoughts, we'd certainly love to hear that.
Well, I'd be interested to hear from other people as well, but my sense is that there really aren't good ways at this point of detecting whether or not students are using them. Most of the cases come from people who can tell, either because there might be fake citations or incorrect citations, or the tone gives it away. These chatbots have a sort of kind of flat generic tone that differs from student voice. And so or maybe they're using terms or phrasing that just doesn't sound like your undergraduate students. And so that might clue them in, but I don't know that there's something like Turnitin or something like that where you can plug this in and it can, with any reliability, determine that this is fake. And in fact, I've heard people say that, students would have access to those same sorts of tools. So what they can do is just reverse engineer so that whatever they're creating through AI won't be detected by the AI generator. So it's kind of an arms race that I don't know is really worth fighting. Most people seem to think that it's better to engage your students in conversations about this and really show them what the limitations are. I mean, it sounds like sort of an ideal approach, but I don't know that at this point that there are any other ways of dealing with it. But I would be really interested to hear other people's experiences.
We have,
Well,
oh, go ahead, Sarah.
Well, I would echo, I would like to hear people's experiences. We know that people are finding people that are cheating. But to Bill's point, this is, you're fighting a river. You're going upstream on a river if you're going to fight it. And so figure out ways to allow students to incorporate it. And understanding that you don't want them to write the entire paper. And so I put something just in the chat here. It's called Ditch That Chat, that textbook, that I think has a nice graphic to kind of show the range of where you may be okay with students using AI, and to have that discussion with them. That is definitely one of the things we're hearing from students, is that they want to hear what you think about it. And so have that, talk about what that range is that's okay and what's not okay.
I try to ask them it has to be included as, that they're using it, and to include class conversation, because there's no way the AI can include our class conversation because they don't know what that conversation was. So to include discussion that we've had and part of whatever they're turning in. And then what drives me crazy are the discussions where I can see the way they speak, and then all of a sudden a different discussion appears with different, I don't know how to address that. Like, how did your language change? That's where I find a challenge. It's very difficult for me to call out a student and say, I can see your native tongue, and then all of a sudden it has changed over here. I'll say, it doesn't look like you've quoted that. You did include that in the, as a source.
I also want to add in that the University of Minnesota does have Turnitin, and Turnitin that tool does have an AI detector, but it is not enabled at the University of Minnesota. And it's not enabled because we have been told by numerous sources that it creates more false positives. And so it's not really detecting it appropriately. And so again, it has not been enabled. And so I don't know that there is a good solution yet at this point.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to call attention to the fact that I'm putting an evaluation form for this session into the chat, and we would so appreciate your feedback, because of course we're planning sessions in the future, and it's important for us to know what your needs are and how well this is supporting you. Thank you.
I would like to bring up Monica's question about can the images that were generated by AI, for example, by Firefly, be used online, but if they're cited? Does anyone have an answer for that one? How best to cite those images?
I think different style manuals are still coming up with that. So you'd want to check first the terms of service of the tool you're using to see, can you even do it? And if you can, I would just say, cite them in the way that you can. If you Google around for MLA citing AI generated stuff, you'll probably find a basic citation style.
Again, I can keep being pulled back into the chat. There's so many different questions and comments going on in there. So at this point, I would just like to allow people to ask questions. We do have 5 more minutes left. It's been wonderful hearing all the input and feedback from everybody here. Can students upload the ebook through chat PDF and use the interactive function to ask questions to help them study?
Yeah, this is Jennifer. I can speak to that. So Sarah mentioned the student focus groups that we had run a few months ago. And one of the participants shared an example of how they were using AI tools as kind of a tutor or a study aid. And they weren't necessarily uploading the entire book, but they were definitely using AI tools to help them understand the textbook better, because in this case, the textbook was a little bit hard to understand. The concepts were hard to understand. And so those were some of the examples that were brought up by the students in terms of how they're using different AI tools to support and enhance their learning in productive ways. So that would definitely be some options there. And I will say the other piece that came out of the student focus groups, and Bill mentioned this earlier, that students are really eager to have those conversations about, well, what does AI look like in this class? What does it look like for this particular assignment? And different folks have shared the syllabus statements, which is a great starting point. But students are really looking for more granularity, more specificity. And, if you're at the point as instructor of just getting started with this too, that could, maybe feel a little bit daunting. And so I think this is a great chance to say, you know what, we're going to explore this together. And so maybe there's a point early in the semester, early in a project or an assignment, where you are taking time to kind of think through that and wrestle with some of those questions with students in a collaborative way.
I'll just add a note. This is Cody. Weirdly, to complicate things, someone asked a great question before of like, well, if we're worried about copyright, can we even use chat PDF? And so I just was trying to look at the terms. They say you agree not to upload anything you don't own or have the rights to upload. So officially, you shouldn't be uploading an ebook chapter that you didn't write or that you are not the publisher for. Realistically, who knows? I mean, I'm sure that's all people are doing, but to have a class do that is another level.
And I'm just going to share one fun thing totally off the topic completely, only because we have 3 minutes left. I just put in oh, that was a direct message. Sorry, let me try it to everyone. There is this fun mashup. It's called Rave, where you can put 2 songs together. And last time I did Blondie's The Tide is High and Missy Elliott's Get Your Freak On, and put the 2 together. And I thought I still had the link to it, and I don't, but you can go do that yourself if you want to. It's just fun what's out there with generative AI tools too.
It sounds like we're wrapping up, so I want to let people know that we're going to send out an email to all of you who attended today or signed up, and we're going to be sharing with you resources. We also are going to clean up the Q&A question answer that we've had here, and we're capturing that in a document. It's not exhaustive by any means, but we're gonna capture those main questions and some of the responses that we've heard here. Also, we will share back with you the recording of this session. And any final words from our presenters at this point?
I want to share one more thing. I found from a colleague at our Rochester campus, they're having charting a course for innovative education with generative AI. And I'll get the registration link here. It's in February. It's an online session. And if you're interested, feel free to register for that. They shared that with me this morning. Otherwise, I would have tried to get it in a little more But here is a link. It's called, this is their Education and Technology Forum 2024 and in the Rochester campus, and it's all on generative AI. So if you're interested, register for that.
And we'll
Um,
put that link, that registration link also in the email. And one more time, I'm gonna ask you to, if you would, please fill out our feedback form, because we would love your feedback. So thank you, everybody. And to all our presenters, bravo. That was a lot of information, and our participants, terrific questions and input in the chat. So thanks all.
Thank you all.
There
I'm
was
s-
also a question that was in here about whether they can share the recording later when we send that out. And yes, we are
Yes.
absolutely okay with you sharing the recording.
It will be a public recording. Good call.